we need to regulate them somehow, even if we're not up to the task, because not doing anything is worse. And in that sense, AI, it automates and accelerates what people do naturally. If you're in a game where, you're one of several interest groups trying to change what people do naturally, AI changes the whole equation. It becomes a mirror through which we see ourselves.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Through Conversations podcast, where we explore the truth through conversations with the most brilliant minds. In today's episode, we're joined by Art Kleiner. Art is a writer, editor, and educator at the New York University, and he's also an entrepreneur. Art has covered responsible AI, the neuroscience of leadership, the history of management, strategic coherence, and the hidden nature of organizations. And he's the author of the newest book, a mind-blowing book, The AI Dilemma, 7 Principles for Responsible Technology. So Art, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you for the compliments as well.
I'm very honored to have you here, and perhaps in this very important time, because when you published the book, which was around August, I believe, around fall, AI was still on the peak of interest, right? Everyone was talking about AI. We still are, but in a different way. AI right now is mainstream, and it's crazy to think about it because it's been a couple of months. But before we get to that and to cover the depths of your book, The AI Dilemma, I would like to know, Art, how did you become interested in the field of artificial intelligence, and how's your trajectory been unfolding until today?
Well, I started as a journalist, and in the 80s, I joined the Whole Earth Catalog, which was a big book that preceded the internet that had to do with picking out the best tools for a better life. Kevin Kelly is an alumnus of that publication, and so are a lot of other people. Stuart Brand was the founder, and the idea was that we would really look at, humanity is getting so powerful that we need to learn more effectively how to use the tools we've developed, or we're going to be in trouble. AI existed at that time, and I was doing a lot of the computer coverage at the Whole Earth Catalog, and so naturally I followed the early stages, and I kind of got tired of writing about technology for a long time. Behind every technology story is a business story, and behind that is a culture story, and I got really interested in the culture of management. And one thing led to another, and I began working a little bit with the writer and researcher and coder, Juliet Powell. And she was working on a dissertation at Columbia that had to do with whether or not companies can be trusted to manage the technology of artificial intelligence. And the short answer is the track record is not great. So, a
Wow.
highly qualified no. And I read the manuscript, and I thought, you've got a book in this. This could be a great book. And I'd been very involved in books, and Juliet invited me to be a co-author, one of the best yes decisions I think I ever made. And that was about 2 years ago. And we wrote the book in a year. We knew it was going to be very timely. We published it, or we actually were about to put it into copy edit when ChatGPT was formally released, the original ChatGPT. So then we rewrote the whole thing in about a month, turned it in again, and it came out in August. And we were, as we watched the book go through production process, we were also watching the whole wave of immediate interest, the fastest growing set of products in consumer history in any sustained way. And now we're watching people make sense of it and say, what are we actually working with here? And what's going to happen as the use of these offerings, of these products and services move out into society as a whole, societies as a whole.
Wow, yeah, it's quite a trajectory, and also working with alongside with Kevin Kelly and Stuart Brand it has been amazing. I can imagine. I actually interviewed Alexander Rose, part of the Long Now Foundation, and in this podcast. So yeah, I really admire them. I hope to have Juliet in the podcast soon, and Kevin Kelly too. to uncover some of the themes, of course with Juliet on the book itself and also her perspective on AI, and with Kevin Kelly on creativity and all of his brilliance. Art, I'm very interested in knowing that, you've been covering this field for many years now. You've had quite the experience in seeing it firsthand, the development in terms of business. You say that business itself, or the question of self-regulating, at least for in the human perspective too, the track record has not been good. And so my concern here is that we're on the verge of creating what a lot of people, most people are saying this could be a godlike technology. It could unfold facets of humanity, of new perspectives of life that we've never seen before. And here's the dilemma, that we can't control ourselves and we can't self-regulate, yet we think we can create a godlike technology. So can you walk me through this, this paradox of like humanity building a godlike technology while not being able to restrain themselves?
Yes, the question is where to start. So let's start with the question, who is we? You just said, we are creating this godlike technology and we don't know how to control it. And that's the dilemma. In the right hands, the technology is amazing. We need it. We probably won't survive climate change without it. It's done already remarkable things for medical technology, and it's doing much more. And yet, in the wrong hands, it's intensely dangerous. And we have lots of stories in our book of the risks involved and what's underneath the risk. And we're not the only ones telling these stories. The people who talk about it are not necessarily the people who create it. And the people who create it are not necessarily the people making decisions about it. So we have a collective mutual understanding problem, right? And Juliet and I identified 4 groups of people who are the critical groups of decision makers around AI. Even they're not monolithic. There's a lot of variation in all these groups. But together, they make the kind of decision-making system that puts AI systems on the map and determines what's going to happen. And they each have their own logic, their own set of assumptions and values and what they care about. So the first of them is business, obviously. The technology companies and the large companies who use them and the consulting firms that work with them and everybody trying to make a profit. And, I worked for the professional services firm PwC for 5 years. I was a managing director. And before that, I worked for the Whole Earth Catalog. So I understand, the entrepreneurial mindset and the business leader mindset of large companies. And they all want the same thing, right? We want to make a living. In order to make a living, and a comfortable one, we basically have to not piss too many people off. We have to fit. Shareholders, stockholders, stakeholders. And at the same time, to be successful as an entrepreneur, you have to do things that nobody else has done before. So you have to transgress. And every really successful business person I know or have read about has been working these two sides of the coin at the same time. How to make, money, sometimes a lot of money, and also how to get along and sort of climb the ladder, but also leap the ladder. And that's what business people are like. And it makes it hard for them because the path of least resistance for them is using the technology to get what they want in both of those domains as rapidly and seamlessly and frictionlessly as possible. And now we're asking them to be responsible. So that's the first group. And yes, we are asking them to be responsible and to understand what responsibility means, right? Okay, so that's the first group. Second group is the engineers, the technologists, the coders, who really understand the depths of the technology. They understand what machine learning is capable of and what it's not capable of. They understand what intelligence means and why it's not the same as human intelligence. And they're very empirically driven. They understand, they base their understanding on what will work and what not and what won't work. They're deep in the practice, and responsibility is not necessarily in their kind of toolbox easily. It's not like becoming a physician or a mechanical engineer where you're certified for responsibility. A bridge breaks and the mechanical engineers involved, or the firm may be held responsible. A doctor is open to, complaints and legal action and the Hippocratic Oath. Software engineers don't have that, even though some outsiders think they do. And they also know that there are other professionals more qualified to deal with responsibility, like risk professionals and legal professionals and HR professionals. So their path of least resistance is to delegate all of that, to think about the elegance of their code and the quality of their code, and to assume that nobody else but them knows as much as they do, which is often the case. So there is another group of people with a very strong culture, but they are also people who wake up in the middle of the night and suddenly realize, what have I been creating? And what are the unexpected consequences, good and bad? And so we've seen a lot of writing and thinking and talking by software professionals, AI professionals, especially lately. The third group is government. Okay, and government is charged with, I said in the book we say that government is charged with authority and with regulation. And I showed that to a friend of mine, and she said, well, actually, you left out administration. You left out, just getting things done and offering services. And government manages their own and everyone else's accountability. Government is typically, the tech industry has a strong libertarian frame of mind, which says essentially government will never be able to hire people with as much expertise as we have. That's turning out to be only partially true. And a number of governments, including the European Union most notably, are now saying it's our turn to regulate artificial intelligence in particular. And we can talk about what that means, because it means some really unprecedented things. But the government leaders are now saying we have to do what it takes to manage this technology as we've managed other technologies in the past, such as nuclear power and nuclear weapons and electricity and telephony before the breakup of AT&T, in the United States at least, and still elsewhere. And so all of us have to kind of come to terms with what government regulation is like when it's good and what it's like when it's not good. And if they're going to use AI to oversee AI, which they will, then we're going to have watch robots. And then there's going to be the question of who watches the watch robots. And with a technology like this, which involves a lot of surveillance and a lot of predictive analytics, government is both extraordinarily beneficial and extraordinarily, risky. And we as a civilization are going to be coming to terms with that. So that's the third group. And then the fourth group are the social justice activists. And in AI, in the field of AI, that has meant a lot of people who were formerly software engineers, who came face to face with the prevalence of bias and risk and harm in artificial intelligence, even in the early stages. So, Joy Buolamwini is publishing a book shortly, or has just now, on, based on her work with gender shades and bias in AI. Many, many other people have spoken out. And they are speaking out on behalf of vulnerable populations, on behalf of all of us, on behalf of, another person I talked to recently said, honestly, I recognize that already I'm in a surveillance society and I just don't like the way it feels. And now where do I go? And these are the people who, if they haven't been activists, social justice activists before, are now moving into that domain. And their deliberation, their statements, their actions do have an effect. But none of these four groups really understand how to talk to one another. And none of them are together in a kind of system of collective understanding that's going to necessarily move AI systems in the right direction. But at least we know who these four groups are and what they care about.
Wow, those I loved how you covered it now, Art. And it's overwhelming in a good way, and it's also informative, and also in the AI dilemma you cover it too. So I appreciate it, and there's so many questions here that emerge, and just so many questions, and it's quite concerning just to start with the bad news. It's quite concerning that we I keep thinking about this concept of godlike technology, that we are about to create something that we don't know. You also cover this in the AI dilemma. The coders themselves don't know how the AI machines come with the answers, come with the process of getting to the answer itself. And some machines are hallucinating themselves. Some machines are creating answers that we don't know how or what do they mean. And so you mentioned the path of least resistance. You mentioned the incentives. You mentioned that at the end of the day, this is business. And so I would like to hear your thoughts. To bring some clarity on how is it possible. And you mentioned also the potential of government regulation, right? But this idea that we're about to unfold a nuclear 2.0 bomb quite scenario. I've had previous guests on the show that mentioned that this is quite like nuclear bombs. And at the same time, we're trying to turn over a profit in our bottom line. And so how do we manage this, Art?
So, yeah, I'm laughing, but I'm not laughing. A lot,
Right.
so a lot depends on our ability to talk these things through ahead of time. Ron Dembo, who wrote a book, Risk Thinking, has pointed out that people have innate risk thinking in their frame of mind and the way we operate. By the way, I'm going to come to this question sort of the long way around. So the short punchline
Perfect.
is we're screwed unless we change. Or if you want the more optimistic way of going at it, human beings have the capacity to change, and we've always sort of managed to do it through the skin of our teeth when push comes to shove. And there are some factors that make it possible to believe we're making progress even right now with all of the horror going on in the United States and everywhere. And at the same time, it's never been easy. Okay, so that's the short answer. But coming around the long way, I don't know if you're familiar with the moral machine, the sort of online experiment demonstration that's put out at the Media Lab. Yeah,
I
we
became
had many.
familiar. I became familiar with it thanks to you, Art, in the AI
Uh,
dilemma. So
well, we opened the AI dilemma by talking about it, and an online sort of thought game that was released by the MIT Media Lab a few years ago, 2018. And by now, and they ask you 13 times to play the trolley game, the trolley dilemma, trolley problem, which is you've got a self-driving car. It's been programmed. It's going down the street. Its brakes fail. It's got to go one way or another way. It's going to kill someone. So who do we want to have it decide in advance it's going to kill? Do we want it to kill, men or women? Jaywalkers or pedestrians crossing at the green? Children or adults, older people, younger people, active people, sedentary people, people or dogs? Who are we going to decide is more expendable than someone else? Horrible choice. You have no choice but to make it. And when it comes to self-driving cars, you have to make that choice in advance, knowing that the technology will follow you. Now, notice we never play the moral machine game with people driving because we know that people will bring their immediate reactions, their adrenaline. It won't happen at the level of thought. They will make a decision, right or wrong, and it's, their system, their whole system will take over, including their emotions, our emotions. But with self-driving cars, the whole system is kind of what you see is what you get. It's the code and the algorithm. So what do we think is right? And they ask millions of people, 233 countries all over the world, at least 40 million separate decisions about who to strike. And the consensus was there's no consensus. There are only three things that people around the world agree on. Hit fewer people rather than more people, unless, of course, you know the fewer people, but hit fewer people more rather than more people. Hit human beings rather than animals. Hit animals rather than human beings. Forgive me, I don't know what I was channeling just then.
You're in nature. You're in nature, so that's why.
Yeah, exactly. It's the
You're
deer
surrounded by
behind
nature.
whispering
Yes.
in my ear. No, spare the animals. And then hit avoid pregnant women. And that's it. Everything else, some cultures favor sparing older people. Some cultures favor sparing younger people. Some would spare, educated people, other people who are not educated. Some cultures favor, spare the jaywalker. Other cultures favor spare the person crossing at the green. On and on and on. The moral of the story is that we need to derive our decisions from context. And if we're waiting for kind of universal principles, we're going to be waiting a long time. So therefore, we need the skills. The solution. Juliet and I were just talking about what the solutions are, and they are beginning to emerge. And some of them are, yes, let's use AI, for example, to track bias. Or, we were just talking about hallucinations. Well, can AI be trained to recognize hallucinations even when they're not obvious to people? Well, sure. That can be a problem that people can now begin to address. And will there be meta versions of this, like asking AI how to train AI, how to recognize hallucinations, and on and on and on, turtles all the way down or all the way up?
Yeah.
That'll happen. But at the end of the day, when something is scarce, it becomes more valuable. And I believe this will apply to human judgment, and not just at the level of a few, sort of Harvard-educated software engineering professionals or Stanford-educated, but at the level of people making decisions everywhere. I think the ability to care and be committed to people, and the ability to, make decisions based on what powerful outcomes are, will become part of the equation in a way that it maybe hasn't before. That's a very optimistic idea. And I believe it, knowing that a lot of people hearing this are going to say, okay, cross this guy out. He's like, or maybe not that, but this is bullshit, basically. This is, nobody really believes that. But I believe a couple things because I've seen them. One is, I believe that when you believe in a person, that belief often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, more often than we think. I've seen it. I've seen the limits on that, but I've seen that happen. I believe another thing, which is that the management of how you do things, how people do things, changes your belief in what you do. So for instance, ESG, environmental, social governance stuff in corporations, has had a lot of fluff, a lot of BS. And at the same time, when people put their attention on something, even though they may not immediately walk the talk, it at least changes what they can talk about. It changes, and that makes a difference. It makes a slow difference. But I think we're seeing, when so I believe two other things. But when the proclamation came out with Steve Wozniak and Tristan Harris and Bengio, and all these other people saying, prominent in the field, saying we need a 6-month moratorium. There obviously was not a 6-month moratorium. But the conversation is taking place now, including here on this podcast, that might not have been taking place in the same way, with the same audience, with the same thoughts. So I believe that. Another thing I really believe is that AI is a forcing function for human awareness of what people do. And we see it, for instance, the European Union is putting forth its AI Act, which will probably pass next year. It'll probably come into reality, and which is really comprehensive. And one of the reasons why it's happening is because the politicians there saw how disinformation was being supercharged by artificial intelligence, by malevolent actors. And yeah, they said, my campaign next year is at risk. If I stand for enlightenment principles in any form, or, sort of tolerance, or, some sort of better collective future, it's especially at risk. If I'm like sort of working towards, exit from fossil fuels, for instance, there are people using these tools. We need to regulate them somehow, even if we're not up to the task, because not doing anything is worse. And in that sense, AI, it automates and accelerates what people do naturally. If you're in a game where, you're one of several interest groups trying to change what people do naturally, AI changes the whole equation. It becomes a mirror through which we see ourselves. And all these things together. And then finally, the other thing I believe is that for 500 years, since probably the printing press, and certainly since the Industrial Revolution, people have become more and more accustomed to being able to choose how they live, where we live, who we live with, whether or not we have children, what we do, where we move, how we relate with others. And once people see that that's possible, they don't want to give it up, and they make sacrifices for it. They resist against it. Choice is horrible. It takes a lot of work. And AI provides the illusion of choice quite often rather than genuine choice. But choice is something that people crave. And as we crave it, we get things like, you said, the Whole Earth Catalog is, we're like gods. And the catchphrase of the Whole Earth Catalog was, we are as gods, we might as well get good at it. Being as gods is the easy part. Right now we have the Tower of Babel, pretty much. We have machine translation almost to a point where it's seamless. And I guess we'll find out whether that story is really a prescription for the future or not. But I don't think it is. But it does mean that we have to get good at it. That's the hard part. And that's the part we, humanity, is just beginning to learn.
Yeah, it's optimistic, and it's also, if I'm being honest, it's frightening that, when you began your answer, Art, you mentioned that critical thinking or judgment is becoming a scarce resource. And on one end, it's optimistic because, we're going to value judgment. But on the other hand, that implies that many people, and millions and billions of people, are becoming less able to judge and right and wrong, or answer these moral questions. And like you say, the moral experiment was the moral machine experiment was such an eye-opener, because we ourselves can't even agree on the right answer. And so how are we supposed to get a universal answer for AI? And that's really a really interesting question and a really interesting topic. And so that's on one end. On the other end, you also touch on misinformation and how the European Union is handling it. And of course, with all of what's happening in the world right now, I think it's clear to say that a lot of people, I think that the consensus would be, I would bet that the consensus would be, it's getting harder to distinguish what's good and what's right, and what's true and what's false, in a way that we're so caught up in the machines, and so many people are using these machines to carve a narrative, and it's getting hard to get to that judgment. And so those two things. And the third one is how you touch about the illusion of choice. And one of the biggest things that I appreciated on the AI dilemma is that you start by saying that we're built biologically to become agents of action. We like agency in our lives, and so while it's hard to get that agency in life, we crave it in a biological sense. And the path of least resistance again comes to mind, Art, because AI gives us this illusionary feeling that we have a choice. And so these three themes, I would try to I would like you to help me unpack them, because like you see, it's overwhelming. But I think we can start with the illusion of choice. What do you mean by the illusion of choice for our listeners who haven't read the AI dilemma? And how does this play out with all of the other things that I mentioned, misinformation and scarcity of judgment?
So, a really great example of the illusion of choice is I've got to write a report, a legal brief, a document of some kind, a paper for a school class or for my boss. And now I have this tool, ChatGPT, and I pay $20 a month to get the up-to-date engine. Never mind that all its data was compiled before November 2021. It's going to take all of my ideas and put them into a coherent form, and I can turn it in. I've got that choice, or I've got the choice of working, staying up all night and finishing it by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Which am I going to choose? Well, of course, I'm going to choose ChatGPT because it works. And I scan it over quickly, and I read it, and I turn it in. And it's full of hallucinations. You can't trace any of the sources. It makes up sources. And it gives you what it has gleaned from a large language model, which basically is tracking what words follow other words in an acceptable sense that is regarded as compelling over time. Millions and millions and millions of times. So it gives you a very clear-sounding, coherent-sounding, mediocre document with false statements in it. That's your real choice. The illusion of choice at first is that you can just turn it in. As that happens and more people get aware of it, they become more sophisticated. And the technology becomes more sophisticated. And we start to learn things like, as the same large language model parses other documents written by AI, its awareness degrades. It becomes more like a Xerox copy of a Xerox copy of a Xerox copy. It becomes, more and more problematic. So it gets upgraded. And, the companies like OpenAI keep tending it and investing in it, and we get more upgraded until the point now we have the choice between so now let's say a year or two from now we have the choice between again staying up till 8 a.m. all morning, or taking a much better written thing and running it through a credibility checker, which will exist by that time, and checking the credibility. And now we've made a second choice, and we've turned it in, and nobody can fault us for it. We're not going to get dinged. We're not going to lose our law license because we turned in something without real cases or what have you. But we've lost the ability now to, through the act of writing, parse through and see what we actually believe. And we've lost the ability to see how that goes if we don't show it to others. So the responsibility of getting better, of having our choice of human experience actually improve the way we operate in the world, that's now on us. We no longer have a structure like a school or a apprentice program or a mentorship that's actually doing it for us. We are now choosing to cast ourselves in the world and And in that, the challenge is, are we going to be more aware of ourselves, or are we going to get into some kind of bubble where it's okay to kind of follow, where the path of least resistance is not being challenged? And, you know, I don't know. I think there's a scenario in scenarios like this. There's always outliers. There's always people doing all of those things. But the question is, which is the prevailing way of activity? Which is the prevailing way the world works? And I think the prevailing way the world works will partly depend on how creativity and intellectual activity is funded. And then I think partly it will be on how it is rewarded. Nobody's going to have enough attention to pay attention to everything. It just isn't that much human attention. So we're going to end up aggregating. We're all going to end up aggregating what we pay attention to and skimming the very, very bits we care about. And AI will be part of the equation of providing that ecosystem. It will be there because people need it. Will it be restrictive or will it be open? Well, there's always openness at the edges. This time it's all edges, and that makes it
Wow.
pretty interesting.
No, it does, and I think one of the biggest eye-opening statements or sentences that you write on the AI dilemma is how, again, and you stress it out now, is how we believe we have the choice, but again, I think, and for myself too, unconsciously, I always catch myself trying to get the path of least resistance, getting the job done. And we don't see how big of a leeway we have given to these technologies, for example, in our really big decisions in life. For example, you touch on dating apps and how we've basically outsourced choosing our potential life partner to a machine that gives us, based on our likes and dislikes and preferences and not, a pool of pictures that we make a decision on. Again, not all people use it for that, but a lot of people use it to find a potential mate. And the results, I mean, sometimes they speak for themselves. It's good and it's bad. There's sources that say that people who meet on these dating apps last longer than real life. Others say they don't last like that much, and it's it's really interesting. And for my generation, for Generation Z, this is the primary source of meeting people, because like you say, back then we had these I would say like this net of life. We had the community, we had religious institutions, we had our hobbies, all of those things. And nowadays, most people find themselves caught up in work or resting. And so we've used these technologies to try to, catch those little glimpses of life, so to say, Art. But that was a preamble just to emphasize that I really appreciate your ideas, and they do make me think. And I think it's a perfect way of if you don't want to add anything on that huge thing that I said, I could ask my question.
Well, I'll take the bait. So you didn't mention people having relationships with bots, and that's
Mm,
even another wrinkle in this, that that is truly the path of least resistance. And
wow.
one of the AI Act's prohibitions is bots that pretend to be people, therapists, love interests, friends. It's okay if they tell you they're AI, but not if they don't. And I agree with that. I do think, the prospect of choosing a mate has always involved serendipity. And to me,
Mm,
which family you were born into, somewhere out there, if you're one of those people who believes there's one soulmate for you out there somewhere, um, you're relying on a lot of serendipity to find that person. But most of us, I think, recognize that we're making decisions about who to be with and for how long based on who we run across. always consensual, even if it's not consensual. In a way, it is, because you never have the person's true heart and soul. Um, I know I mean, I'm glossing over a lot when I say that, so I acknowledge that. But if what you care about is who am I going to consensually spend my life with, as friends, as lovers, as partner, life partners, um, it's always a mess. I think I I think you can make a case that it's less of a mess, even though the apps are a mess and can be superficial. Um, that's a mess that's continually being tweaked and reorganized and reworked on. Um, Whereas, traditional society, it was who your parents were and who they arranged for you to marry. So it's kind of it depends on what you're comparing it to. I do think that the illusion of choice suggest, we want seamlessness, we want frictionlessness. I do. I've spent a lot of my life craving and seeking situations where I didn't have to make a lot of difficult choices, that they would just be made for me. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think I took it to a bit of an extreme. And I had to, when I realized how unhealthy it was for me personally, that took a long time and a lot of pain. Um, I think now we're being asked to take on a level of heroism. We, people in Western society, let's even say people above a certain economic level, because, if you're living at a subsistence level, you're really concerned about survival and understandably so. But if you're beyond that, then what am I going to do with my life? What's important to me? And beyond that, who do I want to be? That question can be answered by just following the track. With AI, it can now be answered in a lot of other ways, even more than the other choice-giving technologies we had before. And so, I sometimes think that, action movies are a way for us to delegate the emotional work of heroism to someone else.
Wow.
And we may not have that luxury anymore. We may have to actually become heroes in our regular lives.
That reminds me. Probably gonna botch the book. I think it was by Ernest Brandt. I think it was. Um, I'm gonna put the link in the notes because I'm forgetting the name of the book. But like you say, it connects with an idea that I've had, that nowadays, with the world that we're living in, almost like virtue, being virtuous and being having sense of agency and deciding by oneself, is almost like a becoming a hero. And these machines, AI machines, while they pose the potential of being our Robin to our Batman, they at the same time can become the Batman of our Robin by making the illusion that we're driving the choices. And you touch on, I think this would be a good path, Art, to touch on two ideas that you discussed in the AI dilemma, and we've discussed throughout the conversation. Is that at the end of the day, these machines are built on code that we created. And you shed a light on the work by Dr. Joy. Her last name was Buwalini.
While, as I understand it, Walamwini.
Buwalini.
Walam.
So yeah, I've reached out to her to invite her on the show. If she sees that I can't say her last name correctly, I think it's a no go. But anyways, I'll leave it at that. Um, she discovered how some machines, some codes, uh, had a bias towards not identifying people of color, Afro American people. They weren't being recognized. And also, you touch on another example that says that people were I think in Europe, were taking out of their insurance because they were said that they weren't paying their pensions, and wrongly so, because an AI machine was tweaked.
Let
Yeah,
me
go.
jump in quickly on that and correct it. These were families receiving child welfare benefits. and a predictive analytics system from the Dutch government's tax office identified them as being more likely to be frauds, and then certified that they were frauds based on this likeliness, which turned out to be based on biases against single-parent families, against people working more than two jobs or more, and against Moroccan and Turkish immigrants. So based on that, it asked those families, or demanded those families, pay back the benefits that they had rightfully received, was not transparent about it, so nobody knew it was happening to other people, imprisoned some of them, imprisoned some of their accountants, and forcibly, this happened to 26,000 families, and about 1,500 children were forcibly separated from their parents as a result of it. Anyway,
Wow.
it's important to get those facts.
No, thank you for clarifying. Yeah, 100%. It's really important. And I think that goes to my question for you, Art, is, at the end of the day, the overarching theme of this conversation is, will AI help us understand ourselves or not? And it's very hard for any individual. For me, I can speak for myself, it's hard to look in the mirror and have an introspective look on what biases I have and what biases I don't have. Some of them, or most of them, perhaps are unconscious. And then comes into the equation of government regulation. And again, this goes into my first question that I had for you, Art, is, even though the incentives are for business, other incentives are for government to take charge. But at the end of the day, government is carried out by people who have the same biases, not the same biases as me, but have biases themselves. So should AI be taking into charge like the European Union is doing so, and like we need to regulate it like very, very, very strongly? How do you see all of these scenarios, these chess moves playing out for the betterment of this technology?
I think we depend on having conversations like this one. That sounds like a platitude. There are, lots of ways to answer that question, and a lot of it depends on, your faith in the people in institutions and the leadership in institutions. And there, I can't argue with people who say, look at the track record, it's pretty bad. I also can't argue with people who say, talk to the people working in government who care about this, and you meet a lot of really noble, dedicated people. One problem is not everybody agrees on who the good guys are and the bad guys are. But in general, there's you can tell when you meet a dedicated professional person, in part by how much credibility they have and how much they can say what others believe in a way that is, respectful and understands where different people are coming from. Okay, so having said all of that, there are two things that the proposed AI Act does that are worth noting. One is it has a category, it divides AI into 4 categories. Minimal risk, which is, basically games and factory management systems and that kind of thing. Very little risk of harm to human beings through the AI. There's the limited risk, which I've already talked about. If it's a chatbot pretending to be your psychiatrist or your therapist, it needs to say that it's a chatbot. The third is high risk, self-driving cars, predictive analytics, systems like that one that, calculated the Dutch welfare fraud cases. They have to be audited. They have to be treated, like with publicly held companies. Outside auditors go in and certify that the financials are correct. And if not, there's trouble down the road, as we're seeing right now in blockchain, which is not audited in that way. But that's why auditing was put in place. And it took decades for the financial services system to get accustomed to being audited this way. The EU would have every tech company that releases AI software have, its intent, its trade secrets audited. That's never happened before. And you and the auditing system, has gone through its ups and downs, but the fact that you have people raising that conversation at least forces a kind of what Adam Smith called the impartial spectator. Would I look at my own activity the same way I would look at somebody else's? And forces us to adopt that. And then, there are some outright bans on some uses of AI. For example, the Black Mirror kind of thing where, groups that are, some groups get much harsher treatment than others and are forbidden to travel and must, the train actually doesn't accept their cards or whatever. That kind of thing would be banned by the EU. Ultimately, we may not have the control that we thought we have, or we may be in a place where it seems like AI is running out of control. But even people who don't have much control over their lives for whatever reason can see what is going on. The genie of AI can't be put back into the bottle, but neither can the bottle. But the genie of awareness of humanity, that's going to be very hard to put back in the bottle as well. It's going to be very hard to keep people from being aware of what's going on elsewhere, even for those who try.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a brilliant point, and I think that goes to the heart of the podcast of my podcast of Through Conversations, is to again have these kind of conversations with brilliant minds like yourself, Art, to shed a light on what we really need to know. And I think that's a train that has left the station in a good way. And I think that here's a very great point to ask you, Art. What if, I'm about to enter into the AI field? What if I'm about to tackle the big task that is, trying to create this godlike machine and to live up to its potential? What would you recommend for all of the people who are in this industry or are interested in the industry to, what are some of the mental models that I should have, or the mindset when I enter this field?
Certainly. Well, Juliet and I do some advising to corporate leaders, and there, the work at that level is what systems and structures can you put in place? For instance, can we create a calculus of risk so that, you can be more intentional about what you put forward and recognize what some of the unintended consequences are? Bring people into the room, we call it creative friction, with conversations that will take everybody forward, raise their skill level, raise the capability level. That doesn't just benefit, the AI risk liability issue, but it also benefits the entire company's capacity for making better, complex decisions. At the individual level, I've signed up for a course in prompt engineering and a course in AI auditing, to find out what's involved in being an auditor of this sort. That might be a really good profession to get into right now, but it's also a necessary way of thinking no matter what your profession is, because this will be as ubiquitous a tool as the word processor in a very short period of time. And a lot depends on knowing how to get past the path of least resistance and really apply the dexterity needed to get high benefits out of it. And I think there is a level at which demonstrating connection with people, the people we care about, demonstrating commitment, is going to necessarily be more valuable. It's always going to be something that AI can't do. Well, AI can do a lot of things. It can demonstrate commitment, but do we feel it when commitment is genuine? Can something that is always a tool demonstrate commitment? If it does, then that means it will no longer be a tool. Then we're into the realm of singularity, and that's a whole other conversation. But
Wow. Yeah, I would love to hear the courses that you're taking, and thank you for that answer. That was really important to. I needed to ask you that question, and I think as we begin to wrap up, Art, I hope we have another conversation, because this is not, it doesn't do justice to your book or to your ideas and our conversation. But for you, let's just wrap up in a good way, in a positive way. But what's your best case scenario? What is your moonshot vision when it comes to these technologies? What are you hoping that these technologies get out of us, and what do you expect us to get out of it?
an example that covers all of this is education. AI should not replace teachers, but AI could be part of a package that from an early age helps people find the teachers they need, compensates for the lack of available teachers in certain subjects, does a lot of real skillful testing and evaluation of people, not cold data, which relegates you to some track based on your performance, but sees and recognizes the skills and capabilities inherent in you, helps bring them out, and gives you some of the experiences you need. If you can't have them directly where you live, then remotely through cross-national global connections and locally. Helps connect you with mentors, maybe finds out ways to compensate those mentors, is bringing down the standard of living by creating ways of thinking about housing and schooling and healthcare, which are the three big cost centers in most of the world, and does all of that in a kind of embedded way so that we, those who are making the decisions about how to use it have a fair amount of agency in moving those decisions towards a better end. And people see that it's valuable. It no longer becomes, in order to get mine, I have to stop you from having yours. I think all that's possible. I think it does start with a few institutions changing for the better and leaders who recognize how to make that happen.
I'm hoping I'm adopting your vision of the future. I think it's a very encouraging one. And again, I think the bottom line is up to us to rise to the occasion, because sometimes, at least for me personally, sometimes I feel that this, again, to the metaphor of the train has left the station. I feel like I'm just a spectator of what's happening in the world, and especially in AI. But like you say, there are some tools that we have in our arsenal, like these conversations, and like your book, The AI Dilemma, Yours and Juliet, which covers these ideas more in depth. And so I encourage our listeners to go read your book, and also for those who stayed until now to tuning in to the conversation between Art and I, we really appreciate you. We would love to hear your thoughts on this new industry, on this new world, this new era of our reality. And with that being said, Art, thank you so much for joining me, and I do hope to host you again sometime.
That would be great. Thank you, Alex. This has been a tremendous pleasure for me. And I too look forward to hearing what your audience says. Thank you.
I will add all of your information, your website, and also the book, The AI Dilemma, into the notes so people can reach out. And yeah, so take care, and we'll stay in touch.
Sounds great.